The way that Google started was an academic venture.
How do you find interesting problems in the world?
Google depends on academia. So many of the good ideas that we've brought forward to the world come from academia.
One of the real reasons to engage with academia is to get a really fresh perspective.
We empower academics to work on real problems, and in the other direction, academics bring ideas and new approaches that are put into practice much more quickly than in an academic environment.
You know, oh, that's interesting, that's interesting, that's interesting. All of a sudden, you've knitted together something that is really, really tremendously powerful.
We need their help because of the problem we're trying to solve internally.
Academia can look far out into the future. It can take greater risks and look for really interesting solutions that industry sometimes cannot.
I'm Dan Russell, and I'm a researcher for user experience in the search group. My job is to try to figure out how people think, particularly about how search works, but more generally, I work a lot with universities, and that's my connection here with the Olsons is part of the University Relationships Program. So I'm heavily involved in sort of making sure that Google connects with the academic research in the world that's really relevant to us, and that's how I know you guys, ultimately.
I'm Judy Olson, faculty member at UC Irvine. Got my PhD at Stanford in cognitive experimental psychology. Spent most of my career at the University of Michigan, as did Judy, and have been studying collaboration since the mid-'80s.
And I'm Judy Olson, and I have a very similar background to Gary in that I got my PhD not at Stanford, but the University of Michigan in cognitive psychology. And then the tech world grew up around us, and there are lots of interesting cognitive things going on.
Well, I think the first thing that Judy and Gary were working on was this collaboration piece. And it became very clear to me several years ago working at Google, because I've been here 8 years now, that the docs work that we were doing, its presentations and spreadsheets and so on, was really in need of some deep thinking. Now, what I found interesting was when I first visited you guys, you had been working on ShrEdit before that, the shared editing stuff. And that actually really impressed me, because then years later, when I was at CSCW, the Computer Supported Cooperative Work Conference, I was demoing one of the first versions of Google Docs. And I would demo this and say, look, isn't this great? And I remember somebody coming out to me and saying, isn't that just ShrEdit? And that's, it kind of reminded me, gee, Judy and Gary have been doing this forever, and we really should connect with them.
We did some carefully controlled studies that showed that working with this collaborative editor really made collaborations work better. I mean, we compared that with people just using the whiteboard and paper and pencil and so on. And the shared editor really was a productivity enhancer. So we had early evidence from the early 90s that this was a good idea. And it took a long time for it to be picked up in the commercial world. And so we're delighted that it has been. What's interesting, I mean, there's a whole culture change that's taken place in the last, 25, 30 years about how much more important teamwork is, whether you're talking about in the industrial setting or even in universities now. I mean, group projects in schools of business, schools of engineering, schools of computer science are just much more common than they ever used to be. I'm waiting for the first collaborative dissertation. Because it's a natural outcome.
But there's also big science happening now too, across universities, and some of that is impossible without these kinds of tools.
Working with other people is considered cheating.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, now we know that now we know it's actually important.
Yeah, that's right.
It's valuable.
The cycle time with which work gets done now is very different. I remember going to a talk where a student presented his work, and it was great, and beside me, the guy had downloaded the data set and redone all the essential key aspects of his algorithm and came up with a different answer. And so what happened was what took 4 years all of a sudden now was compressed into the time of the talk.
Yeah.
Think about what it would have been previously. Well, I'll get back to you with the data and I'll re-implement it. Maybe 6 months later I'll write a paper that rebuts what we found out.
Right.
All of a sudden now it's switched from months to an hour.
Yeah.
And that immediacy of data sharing, immediacy of being able to re-implement and build on top of the infrastructures that we have.
Of course, as we know, I mean, to create the technology that makes this possible, also creates interesting new social issues about, you know, credit, sharing, privacy, control. So there's a whole another round of research that's got to be done on what happened, what are the consequences once we can do this stuff technologically.
Right.
Every time we give a talk, there are excellent questions that people ask that all very much influence our work, the next things that we're going to work on. But also I find out that people who are experts in various topics that we find from the literature are now at Google. And so they're a phone call away, and they're willing to talk to us, all right, because we're part of this partnership. And that's been totally enlightening.
But in the past, we did a sabbatical at Microsoft Research, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. We did a sabbatical at Xerox PARC. So we've done, pretty much all of our sabbaticals have been in corporate settings. And we have very strong connections with IBM. So we love to go back and forth between academia and industry. I think that's a really important kind of partnership.
Right. One of the things that always impresses me when Judy and Gary come to town is that people come out of the woodwork that I never expected. So for example, I think the last time you were here, people from quantitative marketing came and spoke to us.
Yeah.
And it was like, really? I had no idea. And it turns out there was this deep connection that I don't think any of us had anticipated. And so there are connections like that that emerge that you don't anticipate.
Well,
I think that's one of the beautiful things about this.
There's another odd connection that Larry Page took a class from Judy when he was an undergraduate at Michigan.
So I take credit for a lot of things about how this company runs.
Nicely circular.
Yeah, it's nicely circular, right.
You know, this is just an ongoing story. It doesn't end. And I think that's the nature of research. So, you know, we'll study collaboration for another 10 or 15 years, and we'll see where it goes. But then other people will pick it up, and, you know, the story will evolve.
When we started this relationship with Judy and Gary, we sort of had hopes for certain things that would come out of it. But the thing that most surprised me was how many things came out of it that I hadn't anticipated. And I think that's the key idea about a lot of research. You can go in and you can make your spreadsheet, make your project plan, you will execute X, Y, and Z, and that's great. It's
But
the
then there's surprise.
alpha, beta, deltas beyond
Well,
that you don't anticipate,
that's-
which actually have a lot of magic.
That's one reason why it's been so fun to work with you guys, because we laid out a little plan at the beginning, and we've done some of that, but we've done so many other things we didn't have in that plan that, and you were supportive of doing that, and I think that was terrific.
And a lot of the inspiration came from people reacting to what we were doing
interacting
so
with
far.
people, yeah.
And so it's been a really good interaction.
I think you should watch their talk because it's brilliant. There's no question about it. Just watch it.